Hello, 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 sweet babies. Hello, little cougar kittens. In case you're wondering, that was my desktop before I got started. This drawing took 11 hours to complete. And by the way, if you're just joining us for some bizarre reason, I do something called art gripes where I draw a picture and then talk over it. They are the they are the least popular form of entertainment on my channel. And I'm sure lots of people subscribe simply for terrible anime videos and animation specifically. But that's not the kind of channel this is, unfortunately. Which I have reconsidered in the past, changing that up maybe, but probably not. This is more of the "it's me, I'm me" channel. And that's the reason why it did not grow as well as it should have. I'm very self-depreciating too, by the way, in case you're just joining us. But this particular video, I was actually... I kind of have been tracking the numbers on Art Gripes specifically, and thinking about, well, these are obviously going to be the least popular no matter what I do. I was thinking most of that is probably just because people start tuning in and they realize, well, this is an hour-long video, so I'm not going to watch this. And even I do the same thing. There will be people that release videos that I would like to see, but they're simply too long. Not because, I don't have the time, but there are other things that I could be watching, so I just decide, you know what? Not right now. And then I just forget about it and then never go back to it. So to that end, I started thinking maybe there's a way to shorten up these art gripes. But then I thought, I really want to draw Merez again for no reason. For no reason. And also that will give me the opportunity to talk about Star Trek. So that is going to result in easily an hour-plus long video, which you can probably see already at the bottom of your screen. So as a result, yes, this is going to be a long video. I have not actually finalized the video, obviously. I'm watching the footage as it plays back. But I know it will be very long, no matter what I do. Alright, so for this particular thing, this image, I've drawn her several times, but this is Merez from the Star Trek animated series. I've drawn her enough that I have the assumption that most people will know who this is, especially if you're part of my fan base. But I'm sure that there's some people that have no idea who it is. So to that end, and I think this is the primary I end up sticking with, by the way. So to that end, back when the original series stopped airing... Oh man, there is so much. Sorry, I'm thinking about the drawing. This drawing took 11 hours to get done. I'm just getting started with this. There's so much ahead of us. Oh man. But anyways, just like Star Trek. But whenever the original series ended, and at the time the original series was not particularly popular, so it was not what it is today, certainly. It didn't start out like Star Wars did, where Star Wars was originally incredibly popular, and then it sort of waned a little bit, and ended up having problems, and now it has even more problems these days. Star Trek sort of started out with lots of problems, and was sort of a little bitty niche show, and then over time it gained more traction specifically after TNG came out. Then it started developing its own problems, and now it's sort of a dumpster fire of a franchise right now as well, unfortunately. So, whenever the original series first went off the air, they couldn't really get funding to be able to carry on and keep telling the stories they wanted to tell. And the writers that they had, they did bring on... they mainly kept to the same little band of writers, the same little group, the same little family of writers. And it lasted probably 3/4 of the way through TNG before people started actually exiting, I guess. But they did also outsource a lot of their writers and bring in a bunch of random people, especially for the animated series. The animated series was just one idea that they managed to actually get greenlit. So if you look up screens from the animated series, Star Trek, the animated series is just what it's called. And I think they actually greenlit another animated series recently, which has been like the 15th or something pitch for an animated Star Trek series that they've made. Those things never get off the ground, and this one I imagine it's going to have its own share of problems. But I digress. the animated series, whenever it got greenlit, got almost no funding at all. So if you look up images of the show, you will, especially if you look up moving images of the show, you'll think, wow, this kind of looks like garbage. And it's because it had no money. The studio that they actually got to do it basically did it for like pennies, essentially. Like, I'm obviously exaggerating, but they did it for practically nothing. Spent a lot of work on these legs. It takes a while. By the here I was realizing, well, she doesn't have human legs, but she has like the weird sort of cat 3-joint legs. If you ever wondered, that little extra joint that animals seem to have is actually their heel. What we have, our heel bone. It's just that our legs are the ones that are fucked up in the animal kingdom. The joint that most animals have in that area flattened out so that we could walk on top of it. Whereas horses walk on like their remaining tiptoes. Like they're actually walking on their toes. Like this weird... This factoid, animal factoids. Alright, but they hired in a studio that would do it for as cheap as they could possibly get it. So in the case of like Merez here, there is, if you actually watch the show, there are only like a few actual animation cells that they even used for her. And this goes for like almost all the characters. They kept reusing the same ones over and over and over again. And there was one really bad drawing of her, and you can find it pretty easily, where she's like cross-eyed and she has this giant... I forget what it's called. The thing that's on animal noses? Para something? It's some word like that. The thing that helps them smell better. That thing, for some reason, is not only on the tip of her nose, it's like her entire nose. Like, she looks really off-model, and she's really jarring and ugly looking. Nothing like how I draw her, that's for sure. There's that picture, and then there's another picture. And that's the one where she's, like, standing up, and sometimes she'll point, or usually she's just standing there and talking. And I think there's like a third one where she's sitting down and she's listening to... Because she's the comm officer. She's basically replacing Uhura. And she's sitting down using equipment. And those are like the 3 main pictures they drew of her. And they drew enough animation frames that they could have her talk or whatever else. So that's like the only resource that you're going to have in regards to referencing this particular character. And it was that way with every one of the characters. They would have special sequences sometimes, but that cost way more money, so usually wherever they could, they would just reuse the same exact animation cells over and over and over and over again. Because it was just that cheap of a show. So as a result, you might think, well, this is kind of a shitty show, wasn't it? And I brought up writing before. Because the animated series actually used scripts from the original series. Not all of them, obviously. Some of them were written specifically for the animated show. But in many cases, they were just scripts that, due to budgetary limitations with the actual show, the original series, they could not produce at the time. But with an animated series, since you could draw whatever you want to, and you don't have to worry about set designs or anything, they were able to produce those. So as a result, surprisingly, the animated series actually is pretty good as far as the writing goes, because the writing is as good as the original series, because they're just original series scripts. And of course, the voice actors that were on board with the animated series were just like Shatner and Nimoy, like all the original cast members were there doing lines for the dialogue. They reprised their roles, except for the ones that were not there, like Uhura, for example. So if you just close your eyes and listen to it, it's basically like you're just listening to an audio from an old original series episode. And I'm not that much of a fan of the original series. Like, I have my criticisms of the original series. I've rewatched it like 2 or 3 times. I'm nowhere near as much of a fan as I am of DS9 or TNG. And there's not many things in my life that I would consider to be a prisoner of nostalgia with. Because a lot of people are like that. They grew up with one thing, they had a formative experience with it. Like, there's a lot of kids running around now that had that with the Star Wars prequels. And of course, whenever they came out, people like revile. They were just awful. People hated everything about them. But nowadays, of course, you can go online and very easily find swarms of people that insist that the prequels are just misunderstood. They're, timeless classics and things like that. And that's because a lot of parents plop their kids down in front of these movies whenever they were little bitty kids. They had a formative experience watching trash for the first time. So as a result, they think more highly of something than they should as a result. And that's how it is with anything. It doesn't have to be Star Trek or Star Wars. It's anything. Like, video games are like that. Everything is like that. Even people. Like, people, you run into... like, a kid can have a formative experience being a friend with someone that's actually, like, human garbage whenever they're younger. And then they grow up and they're like, no, he was fine, or whatever. That's a really weird specific example. But you get what I'm saying. So, with me, in regards to Star Trek, I sort of have that. Although I tear into Star Trek all the time. Like I've said it before, I'm not a negative person, but I do... Like, I self-criticize and criticize other things a lot. But it's not, like, out of malice. It's more just I'm analyzing it and thinking about it because I enjoy exploring variations like that. And that's... Like, I'm enough not like other people that I have a hard time explaining that to other people. Because whenever I was growing up, I sort of realized that over time. That, most people don't think this way. And it's taken me an entire adult life to sort of sort that out and understand why that is the case. Why other people do not think the way that I think. And I think you probably have your own sort of things, if you're sitting there listening, that makes you distinct from other people that most other people can't really grasp, because you're just sort of that way. So, anyways. Point being, Star Trek, I am a little bit overly enamored with Star Trek. But also I'm very critical of it at the same time, that sort of thing. So going back to the original point, the original series, I never really cared too much for the original series, but I probably would have more so if I had grown up with it. I grew up with TNG. And TNG, my opinion of it these days is, it did have a lot of bad episodes. Let me do it this way. Let me just go down the list. The original series was definitely a product of its time. If you go back and look at some of the episodes these days, of course, a lot of them are going to seem very backwards. Like, Uhura kissing Kirk, for example, was played up as this, like, whoa, I can't believe it's happening. And it's like one of the most awkward things you've ever seen put to film. Because, an interracial kiss had never been done, and Star Trek was the first one to do it. And in the context of that particular episode, I think they were being forced to do it. I don't think they were under mind control. It seems like it was a really bizarre... Like, original series episodes are really fucking weird. They went to this planet that had, like, people with dwarfism that could, like, mind manipulate people into doing what they wanted to against their will, even though they were still aware, and they were able to communicate their lack of... Like, they didn't like what was happening to them. It's really fucking weird. Like, original series is so bizarre sometimes. But anyways, even during the course of that, like, you can tell that the actress and Kirk were like, this is so weird and awkward. Like, it looks as uncomfortable as the story is dictating that it happens to be. It's not great. I'm trying to communicate that the original series can be a little bit weird and awkward sometimes. But the last time that I rewatched the entire series, I got really tired of the formatting of it. Gene Roddenberry was a really progressive guy at the time, although by today's standards, I'm sure that he would not be considered to be, that's for sure, with the type of people that are running around these days. you could tell that he had sort of a, maybe not backwards, I don't know, but he was a very of his time sort of product. Like, I always noticed the way that he treats women. Gene seemed to have he had a thing for a very specific kind of woman that was dressed in a very specific kind of way. This, when I flipped her eye just then, it reminded me of that original Cell where she's got cross eyes. Sorry. And in the course of the original series, you'll notice a lot of the times there are episode after episode of one of the three, like either Spock or McCoy or Kirk usually, would go to a planet. They would meet a woman of a very specific body type with a very specific hairdo, and they always looked almost exactly the same because I think that was just Gene Roddenberry's type or something. He married one of his actresses, by the way, who went on to play Waxana Troy and the computer voice in TNG and so on. And the characters would go to this planet, they would meet the woman, and of course they would fall in love, after like one day of knowing each other. And the episode would play out, the B plot with the woman would play out, and then they would do something like, oh, I need to be a captain, I can't be tied down to this planet, or we're drifting apart, it's some other stupid tired thing. And then of course the woman would leave and never return. I think there's like one or two instances of characters returning, but that's it. That happened so often, I started to get like angry whenever I saw it, because I started anticipating it happening. I would be enjoying the first 5 minutes of an episode. This happened, then this happened. It's like, oh, this is fun. And then it would show the planet, and then the woman. And I say the woman because you could always tell who it would be. The love interest cast actress walked in the frame with the same brunette, like sort of loosely curled hair, and she had a very specific kind of dress that was like, it barely covered her because it was the future. Sure, Gene, sure. And like it loosely hanged over her body, and usually she wasn't wearing any underwear under it. And like it sagged off her back or off the sides or something. Like it clinged to her body, but at the same time it was very loose fabric. It's a very specific look. And I always associate it with original series. So whenever I think of original series, I imagine that format. Of there's a minor problem on a planet, one of the main three cast members falls in love on the planet, there's a little bitty tryst, they have a little minor philosophical dialogue about something, and then they leave. And that happens over and over and over again. And it drove me crazy. It absolutely drove me bonkers. And with season 1 of TNG, you can tell that they were doing the exact same thing. You could definitely tell that they were writing it the same exact way. Like the infamous, heavily racist episode of TNG where they go to Africa Planet, and they're all like dressed up in Oonga Boonga sort of outfits, and they're fighting with like spiked gauntlets and spears and stuff like that. Yeah, that's not really a TNG thing. That's more of an original series sort of a storyline going on there. It had not quite evolved just yet. So yeah, the animated series sort of has that in places. But a lot of the times, the original ideas that they had were so elaborate for the original series that the ones that in the animated series itself usually don't have that same exact problem. Because they're focused more on visuals and the location and stuff like that. It seems like the very first episode may have actually been the one where they go to this incredibly huge, like, defunct space station. There is one thing that I really like about the original series, and especially with some of the dialogue in season 1 of TNG. And it's a very specific way that the characters talk to one another. And I can't really explain it exactly. It's this sort of almost... It comes from old science fiction writers. The way that they would write character dialogue and things like that. You can watch it and you can actually tell. Even during the super racist like African one that everyone lambasts, there is one scene that I remember where Picard is talking to Data and his away team, and they're just talking about philosophy and the way that cultures intermingle and things like. And I can watch that and I think, wow, this sounds like really old sci-fi dialogue. Like, you could just tell, and I really wish I had it in front of me so I could read it off so it'd make more sense. But I always associate that with the original series, and I really like that method of writing. The thing that I've always liked the most about Star Trek is whenever it is philosophical. And I think that goes for most people, I would say. Well, let me first go through this. So the original series I didn't care too much for. It's still fine, but that formatting, the way that Gene wrote everything, kind of just drove me crazy. He was a progressive at the time, but he probably would not be much of one today by today's weird standards. Although, in my opinion, progressives today are not really progressive so much as they're just... I don't know, there's a lot of them today that are just ethical predators. They're not really interested in making the world a better place. They're just looking for people to harass online to make themselves feel superior to everyone around them. And they're just sort of shitty bigots themselves. It's weird how civilization has turned. We've gone from, like, we're so concerned, especially during the 90s, we were so concerned with people being bigots and being close-minded that we sort of raised everyone to be hyper-aware of it, which was good. But now we have the inverse problem of the bigots are not aware that they are bigots, so now they have become the problem. But because we're so trained in our heads to be tolerant of people that are preaching for tolerance, that we can't actually see it anymore. Like, it's very strange. Like, if Gene was alive today, he would probably get eaten alive. He would say something wrong. He would do something that would cause some sort of huge controversy. Like, it's one of those cases. It's especially bad today. It feels like it's probably always been that way, but especially with the internet, it's a little bit more widespread, I guess, is what I'm trying to communicate. But this idea of everyone blaming yesterday for not being tomorrow, that sort of thing. Like kids finding out Andrew Jackson had slaves, or something like that. Oh, he was a monster, and then they write off everything that ever happened in regards to whoever it was. And you can't really explain to them, you can't say something like, it was a different time, because they'll point at you and make the Invasion of the Body Snatchers screeching noise. Like, oh, you're a bigot too! And I'm like, no, we're not bigots, jackass. It's just that it was a different point in history and the values were completely different. And the problem obviously was them in the sense that they did not comprehend such things now. But also the problem lies with you because you're unable to actually understand the time that it happened in and why someone like Ulysses S. Grant is probably a good example, I guess. Or Robert E. Lee, those two figures. Of a lot of people will tout them as being these enlightened men, but they also had their own links in slavery and were assholes in their own right. So a lot of people treat it as a black or white issue where they write them off as being monsters one way or the other, and other people write them off as being heroes that were just misunderstood, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no... Everything is black and white, especially online. People don't want to actually... That's what I always liked about Star Trek, is that people actually sit down and talk about issues, and they try to be fair about it. Like, there's nothing worse than either a liberal or a conservative just sitting down and preaching at you. Like having a very special episode where they talk about gun control or abortion or something, and they lecture the viewer, this is why this, like, when it's obviously written by some, like, entitled asshole Californian or something, who's never actually thought about anything other than how morally righteous he is for his entire life. So the entire script just reads like someone sitting a conservative in front of them and just screaming at them, that sort of thing. So that's especially prevalent with films and TV because they're West Coast shows or Californians. Californians are writing them. So that happens a lot. But Star Trek managed to actually get away from a lot of that. It never had that much of a problem. I can't really think of too many instances where they bring up something, but they don't talk about it. Like they're just lecturing. That never really happens. Usually they at least discuss matters in a way. Do this. Okay, original series didn't enjoy that too much. The animated series was a good show, but obviously had lots of production issues. TNG, like TNG, but TNG has lots of problems in regards to individual episodes being crappy or excellent. Like TNG has some amazing individual episodes. Probably the best in all of Star Trek. But it also has lots of stinkers. DS9 is incredibly consistent. It does have its share of bad episodes. It doesn't have as many, like, wow episodes. Like, it has, like, some, like, Duet is a great... God, that's a good episode. The performance of that actor, I forget what his name is, but anyways. But DS9 is very consistent. May not be the best episodes, the best writing, but it is very consistent. Then you get to Voyager. Voyager just kind of turned into... Voyager has like one or two episodes that I would consider to be on par with the better episodes of the other series, but for the most part, it kind of just existed. It was a... Gosh, I can't even think of their name right now. I'm thinking about too many things at once. It was... Rick Berman, yeah. Is Rick Berman just trying to make sure that the franchise kept going? Like, Rick Berman did a lot to fuck over Star Trek, but he's the reason why it stayed on the air for as long as it did. And probably the reason why it continues to persist to this day. Like, he was a pain in the ass, apparently, according to everyone around him. According to the only gay writer on TNG, he was a huge bigot himself, but... He's part of the reason why that Star Trek was as successful as it was. But Voyager was just a product of that. It was just, we need to have a Star Trek show on the air. Just keep producing them. The quality kind of went to shit. It turned into a stupid generic action adventure show where Janeway, a science officer, a science captain on, not specifically a science vessel, but it was a scout science vessel, was solving every problem by dressing up in an A shirt, or it's not A shirt. No, is it A shirt? A wife beater. It's just a fucking wife beater. Dressing up in a wife beater and solving every problem with like overwhelming violence, that sort of thing. So they kind of turned into shit. Enterprise was a byproduct of that as well, although it started improving once they finally brought on new writers and got rid of Berman and Braga influencing too much of the show, because they were just phoning in everything, and their writing was just terrible. It was absolutely terrible. But it just couldn't recover after that. So that's my opinion of all those series, is trying to get that out of the way as fast as possible. Roddenberry, I was going to say about Roddenberry was definitely a product of his time. That's the reason why I was talking about Grant and all that other nonsense. Is because if you actually had him around today, people would have the same criticisms and would not understand him anymore. Like, he was very progressive at the time, but these days he would probably be seen as a fossil. Like, there's just too many weird eccentricities about the man that probably would have resulted in some sort of controversy of some sort. As dumb as that may or may not be these days. Okay. But I was going to say, there's not too many instances of the shows not covering all their bases in regards to debate. There's only a few things that I can think of. One of them was, there was a DS9 episode where there were immigrants that came out of the wormhole fleeing from the Dominion, and they got on the station, and the whole point of the episode, according to the writers, I can't even remember what its name is. It's a really terrible episode. The whole point, according to the writers, was trying to show that when immigrants show up, maybe they appear to be like incredibly shitty human beings to us because our values are so dramatically different. So whenever they showed up, like, these aliens are like the worst aliens you could imagine. They look dirty. They misbehave constantly. One of the weird things was they were a matriarchy, so they were constantly lecturing all the crew members about the superiority of women. Like, it's really weird. And like they were constantly shedding, like they were very oily looking, and they were leaving like skin flakes and like shedded skin all over the place all the time. They were constantly stealing things from other people, breaking other people's equipment for no reason other than all those rascals. And the very end was they had some inane prophecy about how, by the way, this background takes fucking forever. They had some inane prophecy about how they were going through the wormhole because they were looking for their new homeworld, the prophesied homeworld that will be theirs. You know, it's very specific. And the Federation finds a world that is like perfect for them. It's uninhabited. It's very close to everything that they wanted. It's just like this near paradise, according to them. But then they decide, no, our homeworld is Bajor. That like the Bajor is the name of the planet that the station, titular station, originally orbited, and now the station, of course, is in front of the wormhole at this point. And they had just been through a war occupation by the Cardassians. So their entire culture has basically just been annihilated. Their world was strip mined for every resource that it has. People on Bajor are just dying. Like, they're just... It's a terrible, terrible situation. And that's part of the reason why the Federation is there in the first place. They're giving aid. Like, that's the whole point. So these dirty, filthy aliens that are constantly screaming about how right they are, well, they steal all your stuff, and like they're just horrible, horrible creatures. Decide, no, Bajor is our home. You will let us go there. And they even consider it briefly. Like, they even bring it before their little council. And Kira eventually has to say, no, we decided against it because it's kind of insane. Like, she does it way more delicately than that. She's incredibly reasonable about the whole thing. And, like, the episode ends with the dirty, filthy, racist, stupid aliens lecturing the Federation and Kira about how, well, you lost a friend because you wouldn't let us rape your world. Like, it's... And, of course, the writer's whole point was supposed to be, well, they're just different. We can't really recognize that. But it didn't come together, I guess because of writing constraints at the time, or, like, time constraints or something. I don't know. So it just comes across as just being this morally, like, righteous, fart-sniffing adventure into mediocrity. Like, it's a pathetic episode. It's incredibly stupid. So that's like one of the only cases where I can think of where a Star Trek episode is trying to, like, wax morally, like, they're trying to preach at the audience about something, but it just fails completely. And there's no dialogue. Like, there's no back and forth of, well, maybe this, maybe this. There's a lot of Star Trek episodes where maybe you feel like whenever you're watching it, there is a right answer and a wrong answer, but they still explore the options. There's one specific one, it's not a great episode, but it's a glaring example to me. I think it's called Pen Pals. It's an episode where Data befriends this ugly, ugly little girl. Like, she's really fucking ugly. Ugly child. Hideous creep. She, like, her face kind of looks like she's a burn victim. The first time I saw it, I actually wondered if she was injured or something. No, they're just ugly aliens. But he starts communicating with this girl in private. Sounds suspect, doesn't it? Sharzhinka, I think her name was. And he finds out that their world is basically an exploding lava world. And their entire species and everything on their planet will die. They're all going to die. That is 100% certain. And Data's talking with her, and it's like this little cutesy thing where, well, she was scared, and I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I brought it to your attention, Captain, that sort of thing. And the crux of the episode becomes, do we save this little girl? Do we save this planet? Because the Prime Directive says do not interfere with other cultures. So there's a scene where they're all gathered together in their little lobby, and they're having a philosophical discussion, which is the best part of Star Trek. Not Spock screaming and punching someone, punching Nero, whatever the fuck is, Khan, punching the shit out of Khan in a fucking movie. Goddamn. It's not that. It's them talking about things. It's boring episodes where they're sitting down and talking about subjects. I fucking love Star Trek for that reason. Okay, anyways. Wish my power thing would stop beeping. Will you shut up? There's nothing for you to be complaining about. It's my backup battery sort of thing. Sometimes it just starts beeping wildly for no reason. Okay, but in the course of this episode, they're all gathered together in the lobby, and they're talking about why they should or should not... I think it's a Season 2 episode. Yeah, because Pulaski's there. They're talking about whether or not they should or should not rescue this little girl or this entire species. And they're all sort of like sniffing their own farts and talking about how they cannot morally save the species because that's not their place. That's what the Prime Directive is supposed to do. And this is one of those weird cases where I feel like the writer for that episode didn't understand like the actual Prime Directive, what it was. Because even back then, back in the 90s, whenever I was watching this, and even today I'll still watch it and still have this reaction, screaming at the screen, no, you fucking idiots, that's not how the Prime Directive works. Because the whole point of the Prime Directive is, if you interfere with another culture, like, if we took all our laptops and internet and all this other shit down to one of these isolated South American tribes that are stuck in the Amazon somewhere, and they're, you know, the government, the local governments protect them, make sure that they can't be influenced. If we took all this shit down there and started giving them all this stuff and trying to train them up, like, this is how you use the internet, this is how you drive a Model T car, blah, blah, blah. If we started doing that, it would decimate their culture. Like, it would just ruin them. Like, you could drop a single artifact, like, here's a crowbar, and you just throw a crowbar down there. They would probably start fighting over it or something. But there's many cultures on Earth that don't have a concept of something like ownership. So whenever you just introduce something as small as that, just the idea that you can possess something and it belongs to you, then it can destroy culture. So the whole concept of the Prime Directive is, do not possibly ruin other alien species, other cultures, by introducing them to concepts that they are not ready for. And the Prime Directive, it doesn't really stop, but they ease up on it whenever the alien species starts developing things like the ability to travel through space at interstellar speeds. As soon as they get that, and that's the reason why the Vulcans went and contacted humans, because they detected that humans had just used their warp drive for the very first time. So whenever they detect that, then they're like, okay, now we can actually start opening up a dialogue with them. And that's whenever it has its little cutoff point. So, on this planet with Sharjinka, the ugly child, it's lava world. They show it, like, there's just explosions everywhere. Volcanoes are, like, rising up out of the planet, and they're just blasting people. It's awful. Like, everyone's going to die. They're very clear about it. Everyone is going to die. This species will not exist anymore. All of them are dead. And they're sitting around talking about the Prime Directive. Well, we can't interfere with this. This would be interfering with the natural evolution of the species. And it always pissed me off, because there's no natural evolution of the species at this point. They're all going to die. And it's not a matter of evolution, it's just because the planet that they happen to be on is about to blow up. The whole fucking thing is going to explode. That's not a matter of influencing their evolution. You don't even have to go down there to fix the problem. They, like, at the very end, they actually fix the problem. They, like, I don't know, they, like, shoot a photon torpedo down a hole or something. It's some dumbass thing. So it has nothing to do with that. but them sitting around talking about how they can't possibly be allowed to influence this species because of the Prime Directive, like, sends me into a fit of rage listening to it. I can't even remember exactly why I came up with this, but just to say, I guess, that sometimes Star Trek, sometimes TNG would have these sequences where they have like moral certainty, or they're trying to have a dialogue where like the opposing side just seems insane. There's another example of that I can think of off the top of my head, where Waxana Troy comes on board. A lot of people can't stand Waxana Troy, and whenever I was younger, I especially couldn't. There's an episode where they go into her backstory about how she... I won't spoil anything. It's a really good episode. How she lost a family member, and it's in relation to Counselor Troy as well. How she lost a family member, and it really goes into detail about her character, what kind of person that she is. And the actress, I can't remember what her... Obviously, someone Roddenberry, it's his wife. I can't remember what her name is, for God's sakes. Poor woman. But you really get a feel for who she is, and it really made me like her a lot more. And they sort of ruined her after that, especially DS9. DS9 really fucks up a lot of characters. DS9 fucked up Waxana Troy. It really fucked up Q. Voyager did most of the damage on Q, but I think that was the first example where Q gets into a boxing match with Sisko for some reason, and Sisko punches him out, makes him look like an idiot. And do you remember when Q started the war with the Borg because he was angry at humans, and like he was like a almost sort of like a Loki-like figure where he was interfering with the development of humans because he was challenging them on a philosophical level, and he had a point. He wasn't a clown, and Voyager just turned into a... Anyways, I'm getting off track. Anyways, there's this episode with Waxana Troy, and the entire premise was they are working with this species to find a way to repair their sun, the star that their planet is orbiting. And this star is going to explode soon. Like, it's nearing death. And in like less than a generation, I think it was, this thing is either going to explode or something very violent is going to happen that will result in like a cataclysmic events that will basically destroy their entire species. So this scientist comes aboard, and he is like their best scientist. He thinks he's almost figured out how to repair their star. And spoiler, it doesn't actually end up working. But the actual the entire point of the episode is his culture has this rule that whenever you make it to the age of 60, I think, is either 60 or 65, maybe it's 70, then you have to commit suicide because you're making room for the next generation and they will continue your work, that sort of thing. And Waxana, who is, that age, I think she may have been a little bit older than he is, I can't quite remember, is just furious over this because she's really developed a liking to him. She quote unquote fell in love with him after a few days because Star Trek, you have to fall in love real fast for network television. So she's just up in arms about this. And of course, she's not an officer. She's just technically she's an ambassador, but as far as they're concerned, she's a civilian on board at this point. And she's like threatening to go down to the planet and start not an international, but interstellar incident, I guess, over this. And they're having a hard time controlling her because she's just so upset about it. Over this, and she has quite a few neat scenes where she's complaining about, like, she's also projecting, saying, I can't believe that these people are telling, his own daughter even, are begging him to kill himself because he's gotten too old to be used to society anymore. And she's like, can you imagine being told by your own family that you have no point in this world and that you're useless? Like, it's really diving into problems that older people have, where they're sort of being forgotten and they feel like they're being a burden on everyone around them, that sort of thing. So in that sense, it's a good episode. Um, but it's another problem with, well, they're just a different culture. We don't understand it. Uh, but it is. I have that same reaction. I have that same reaction of watching the ugly little girl and her having the stupid Prime Directive debate, where I feel like the argument against it, like the philosophical argument that they're just a misunderstood culture, is not being elaborated on well enough to support the argument. Because, like, maybe if they'd gone into more of the reasons why the culture developed that way, but the way that they portray it in the show, the way it's executed, just makes the species look like a bunch of fucking idiots. It really just makes you hate, especially his daughter. His daughter has that stupid bitch haircut that women like to have sometimes, when they pull their hair back as tight as they can get it, and it's in a little bitty bun. And she just looks like a fucking idiot. Like, I'm probably projecting because someone that I hate in real life, from a job I did a long time ago, I associate that haircut with, this is a stupid bitch. Like, anytime I see it, I have this incredibly visceral, like, primal reaction of, fuck this bitch. Like, it's really primal with me. But anyways, she also was acting like a really dumbass at the time. She was lecturing Roxana, you don't understand our culture, how dare you, like that. And begging her father to come back to the planet to kill himself in ritual. So, if you had written it a little bit better, I could understand it. I could understand the idea of, well, they're just misunderstood. Maybe this works for their culture. Maybe because of their biology, or there was a very specific circumstance that embedded this within their nature. Something like that. But the way that it's executed just makes them come across to me as being these hateful, small-minded, dumb little bigots that just need to be spanked. You just need to slap the shit out of them because they're so fucking stupid. But there is a comeuppance. Because at the end of the episode, they make it very clear, this guy is the best chance for their species. If you gave him a few more years, he probably could figure out what to do about their exploding star. But instead, even their politicians are like phoning the Enterprise and saying, you will start an interstellar instance. This could be war if you don't return our scientist so that he can kill himself. And at the end of the episode, he goes back down and he dies, and Roxana goes with him to watch, to pay her final respects, I guess. And at the end of the episode, there are no other scientists that are like, I will pick up the case, I was second best, I know, and I'm 20 years old, or whatever. No, they don't know what to do. The Enterprise sails away, and no one knows what the solution is going to be. And it's sort of hinted that they're doomed. Like, their entire species is now doomed because they were so insistent about murdering this scientist that could have been the savior of their entire species. He could have saved everyone, but instead their stupid value of killing old people took precedent over actually, like, resolving a huge, like, the most critical, like, extinction level event that could ever happen. And they instead decide, nah, fuck it, we'll figure it out, maybe, probably, maybe not. But it's more important that this girl's father die. That's way more important. And that's one of the I bring it up because that's one of the cases of sometimes Star Trek does it well, sometimes it doesn't. In this whole back and forth philosophical debate of understanding what is right, what is wrong, why is this right? Sometimes it doesn't quite hit the mark. There are many great examples of them doing it right, though. Like, there's somewhat early episode of a scientist from the Federation wants to take data because he is, quote unquote, the property of the Federation. And it's The Measure of a Man, I believe is the name of the episode. And the entire point of the episode is trying to define what is life, what is sentience. Does Data deserve to have his own, like, free will? Like, we're going to take him and disassemble him. And it's heavily implied that the guy that wants to do it he wants fame. Like, he doesn't actually know what he's doing. And he's just assuming, well, after I destroy Data, then I'll probably figure it out. So they have to have a legal hearing in which they have, like, arbitration, and Riker is forced into being the prosecutor and things like that. It's really well-done episode. They have a lot of philosophical arguments about the nature of what is life, whether things like his super strength and the fact that you can disassemble him and, like, put his head on the counter and things like that, or reach onto his back and flip his off switch to make him unconscious. Like, does that make him not worth consideration as being a being? And they have to bring out stuff like Tasha Yar had a romantic fling with Data and, like, actually had sex with him. That's how he lost his virginity. And he holds her with great esteem. And even, like, though he doesn't technically have emotions, he feels significant loss when a crew member dies and things like that. It's a really good episode. It covers a lot of philosophical ground. There are some episodes that just do a great job of covering that element of fiction that you don't really see it much anymore. I can't really think of any shows, especially these days, where it's just people in a room sitting down, just talking about ideas. Like, sometimes there's shows where people are just talking about, like, so-and-so killed so-and-so having an adultery, and it's just, like, for the sake of drama. So people do talk, obviously. But not ones where they're talking about, like, really abstract, complicated subjects. And that's the thing I always liked about Star Trek. And that's the reason why Star Trek existed in the first place. Because Gene, as flawed as he is, or was, and maybe more of a product of his time, that sort of thing, all that to the side, he understood back in the 60s and 70s that society needed to advance. Like, he didn't like the treatment of ethnicities, he didn't like the treatment of women, that sort of thing. Even though especially in, I think the pilot episode, they have this weird conversation where, I think CBS, was it, didn't want the first officer to be a woman because they thought it was too unrealistic, or it was some weird thing like that. And even in the course of the dialogue, I think Pike has to address someone asking, a female first officer, that's weird. They're like, yeah, soon we might even have a female captain, that sort of thing. Even though canonically there have been lots of female captains. And by that point in history, like, the whole concept of anyone having a problem with that at all is absolutely ridiculous. But that's just a result of the canon sort of creeping in. And the original series, the way that it wrote its own setting, kind of becoming invalidated as the real world, the way that people think in the real world kind of moved on without the original. It moved past that, in other words. Anyways, what am I saying? But in regards to, I'm backtracking to all my old thoughts. In regards to Star Trek, that's what I always liked about it. So, in regards to things like Discovery, which came out STD, they pushed so hard for people to say, no, it's DSC, please. And people are like, no, it clearly says Star Trek Discovery, it's STD. They hate it that people refer to it as that. It's like the X-Bone thing again, where they're like, oh shit, we never thought of X-Bone. We were trying to trick people into saying Xbox One to make it sound superior. We didn't expect them to say X-Bone. Oh no! I love it when stuff like that happens. Anyways, with, like, my problem with Discovery, like, the events, things that are, like, it's not that terrible of a show, it's generic. Like, if it didn't have the Star Trek label on it, no one would care. Like, it probably would have been canceled already. Especially since it's on a proprietary service, like a All Access or whatever it's called. I stopped watching it. Like, I watched like 10 or something episodes, and I just got too tired of it. It's just kind of a nothing show. It's just one of those things where people, there's drama, there's people punching each other, there's action, but there's no scenes of people sitting down in a room talking about philosophy, talking about the nature of what it means to exist as a person, or like in Duet, talking about the accountability of a species versus the accountability of an individual, how you can move ahead as a society unless you have a scapegoat for events. Like, all these amazing ideas that people are exploring in the prior series just never get touched on in Discovery, because Discovery is just a vessel for merchandise. It's just modern CBS executives saying we need a property, oh, we own Star Trek, make something and just attach enough tribbles and Star Trek noises to it so that people can shut up and just assume that it's Star Trek. And make sure that it has all these like plug-in formulaic things of there needs to be action, there needs to be progressive 2010 like gay folk and stuff like that. Like, it's hitting all these buttons, but the show sucks. It just fucking sucks. Like, it's not the worst thing ever. Like, it's not that bad, but it's not Star Trek. And it's not Star Trek not because the Klingons look weird or anything like that. I think I mentioned this on one of the Best Friends podcasts before. But my problem with it is that Star Trek was originally conceived by Gene because of the necessity of trying to show humanity at its best. Like, this is what humanity will look like one day. This is not what we should look like. This is what we will be. Like, we will be at a point in which the idea of gender, race, like class division, all these things will not exist anymore. Because that is the point that humans will move to. Like, we will either die or we will progress to the point where even talking about those things is not even necessary anymore. Like, one of the things DS9 did to Sisko was he became, like, obsessed with, like, racism for some reason because he's the black captain. Even though during his day and age, the whole concept of him being angry about race wouldn't make any sense because he lives in an era in which that doesn't even exist anymore. Whatever. That was really for the sake of convenience because at the time they were doing a few, like, race-related episodes, and they even had to do things like have him go through dream sequences or go back in time just so that they could have the episodes, because modern, like, the Federation during that era does not have that anymore. People aren't even like that, because that's the whole point of the Trek shows, is that this is the future. This is how people are. So when Discovery comes along and they're like, no, humans are fighting with one another constantly, and there's lots of bigotry and violence, and there's constant wars and misunderstandings. It's like, this is an era in which, because of the way that progressivism was pushed in the 90s and the fact that kids have grown up with a warped, distorted idea of what ethics is, like, there's lots of kids these days that think of themselves as being ethically superior intrinsically, so they never self-evaluate. They can't look at themselves and understand that there are elements to their own character that need improvement, because they've been raised their entire lives to think, no, all the bad people are down in the American South or out in the Midwest. Those are all the ignorant, bigoted conservatives are. And where we live, this is the enlightened center of all reason. We're the enlightened ones, and you need to make sure that everyone realizes that in the future. And that's what happened in the 90s. And the same thing happened with conservatives too, where they're raising their kids to, like, demonize, like, all the, like, pot-smoking hippies that, like, that sort of dumb thing too, where all the supposedly enlightened people are themselves like monsters. And there's a lot of binary stuff going on now as a result of the 80s and 90s. And this would be a great time for a Star Trek show with enlightened, actually, like, people that, with writers that know how to address those issues and explore them, more importantly, to actually have a show in which they do so, where they sit down Have the characters talk about something and actually explore it. But Discovery doesn't do that. Discovery wants to be an action show. Even though this is the best point in history to have a new Star Trek show that actually addresses those issues. Because the thing that made Star Trek has always made shitty movies. Star Trek movies are terrible because a movie, sort of by its nature, has to be enclosed. It has to sort of be sort of fun and actiony, and there's a very specific point to it. Having people sit down for 2 hours and talk does not make for a gripping movie, so it's understandable why Star Trek movies have never been particularly great. But as a series, Star Trek has always been excellent for that reason, the exploration aspect of it. Having characters sit down and just explore ideas. That's what makes Star Trek superior to a lot of other shows. That's its advantage. And that's what we need right now. We don't need a liberal, lecturing people like gay people are just the same as you and me. We know, thank you, for God's sakes. This isn't 1989, thank you. We don't need someone like that, lecturing people on what their West Coast values are. And we don't need the reverse of that either, where it's some conservative doing some weird-ass thing about lecturing people about why gun control is not what it should be, or so. I don't know what it'd be. It'd be something strange. We don't need that either. We don't even need right and wrong. It doesn't have to be someone, preaching. We just need people sitting down civilly, because it's the future, and people have moved past being stupid bigots and just screaming at each other over the internet. And they're just talking. They are just discussing an issue, not because they want to be right or wrong, but because they're actually interested in exploring the nature of, maybe that's where I get it, I don't know. But I've said this before, that I'm not really critical so much as I like to find things that I find interesting and then sort of evaluate. But this reflection never works out. It goes very badly, no matter what I do with it. I would have to redraw the whole thing. Goddamn, what was I saying? Good grief now. This is the time which we need people to do something like that, to discuss issues, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. This would be a great time for people to just discuss things, to have open dialogue, and to explore them. Without biases, without bigotry, without accusations. Just... that's where I get it. Like I've said before, that I'm not really critical so much as if I think something is interesting, then I want to explore it. So I will sit there and just go over the pros and cons of it. And to most people that sounds like complaining, and it took me, this is another adultism, it took me a long time to figure out, most people aren't like me in this particular area. And it just took me a long time to be able to sort of gather myself and figure out how to present myself to an audience as a result of that. Because most people are just not like me in that regard. Maybe that's where I get it from. Maybe it's Star Trek. Maybe that's what it was. Because that's what I think of whenever I think of Star Trek. I think of a series in which there is open dialogue for the sake of exploration. They're exploring issues. They're not lecturing the audience. They're not proving that they're right. They're just asking questions and exploring the answers. And maybe at the end of the episode, they don't even know if they're right or wrong. They can just float away into the night with questions in their heads and no real answers. That's what makes Star Trek good. That's Star Trek. So whenever you have something like Discovery in which they're just punching each other, is when the war against the Klingons started, and they have a bunch of progressive cast members or whatever for the sake of being progressive. I have nothing against it. But I mean, it's Star Trek. It's the future. They don't even worry about it anymore. And if you're going to have a character that's gay, that's great, fine. But, what's their actual character? Are they interesting? And a lot of the times with these a lot of times with these sort of casting decisions is that no, they aren't. They're just there for the sake of being there. And I've talked about this before, about the, what did I call it before? The, what's her name? Black Widow? I think I've discussed this before. The Black Widow problem of we need to have a strong female lead, that sort of thing, because progressivism. And then they have the female character, but she doesn't have a personality. She doesn't really have any elements to her that make her an interesting character. She's not fun. She's not dynamic. She's not really exploring anything. She's just dressed up in spandex, flipping around, beating up a bunch of men because progressivism. And she, like, maybe, I need to find my father, or, you know, it's just something like that, where they're like, well, we got to give her something. So they give her something generic like that, where she's looking for her dead father, or, you know, oh, one time when I was young, my mother did this, but there's not really any depth to it. She's not a character. Like, that's my problem with it, is that it's fine, but you need to make sure that there's actual depth to it. Anyways, here's the picture. If you couldn't notice, I lost track of time. If you couldn't notice, during the course of this, all the weird scenery, I was trying to make sure that I was coming up with something that looked like truly alien scenery. In the course of doing, like, Star Trek, the episodes, obviously they were working on a Hollywood set. They don't have an infinite budget. So whenever you're actually portraying weird, like, sci-fi landscapes, I always think back to, like, weird 1970s concepts. Because there's a lot of art during that time that's amazing for that reason. Like, it's really creative and very interesting looking. And I sort of want to harken back to that. So I had this idea of, well, what if it's a low-gravity planet in which it's, like, there's something about the atmosphere that makes it very, like, everything is either floaty or there's clouds everywhere. Like, it's very atmospheric. So I came up with these ideas. What are these large, like, jellyfish, like, mushroom tree analogs? Maybe they have a life cycle where they start near the water, they grow up through the roots, and then they sort of float off into the atmosphere. And they just sort of hang there for the rest of their lives, dropping seeds across the landscape. Like, I wanted to explore that idea. Just weird alien sort of stuff going on. And also there's a sexy cat girl, I guess. Whatever. More to the point, I really wanted to explore the landscape. Anyways, you get the idea. I could talk ad nauseum about Star Trek and the nature of how it has succeeded and failed, but I guess I can do more commentary tracks for Star Trek films in the future for that reason. I also did a Star Trek First Contact commentary track with Pat and Matt. If you have not seen that, you got to make sure that you actually have the film, or obviously it's not going to make too much sense. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this long-ass art gripe. All 15,000 or so of you. I'll see you guys next time.